Johnny Carson stopped in the middle of his monologue, read the small note on his desk, and walked off stage without a word. Nothing like this had ever happened in his 30-year career. It was March 1982. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B in Burbank. Tuesday night. The monologue was going perfectly. Johnny was in top form, sharp timing, the audience laughing at every beat, Ed McMahon's booming laugh punctuating the punchlines like clockwork. Johnny had just delivered a joke about the economy when he noticed it. A small piece of paper on his desk that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. White. Folded once. Placed carefully next to his coffee mug while he'd been facing the audience. His stage manager, Shirley, must have put it there during the laugh break. But Shirley never interrupted the monologue. Never. That was the cardinal rule. Once Johnny started his opening, nothing stopped until he sat down. Johnny glanced at the note. Then at Shirley, standing just off camera in the wings. Her face was pale. Her eyes red. The audience was still laughing from the previous joke, waiting for the next one. Johnny had the next cue card in his hand. The show was flowing perfectly. But something in Shirley's expression made him stop. He set down the cue card. Picked up the note. Unfolded it. The studio began to quiet. 300 people sensing a shift in energy, that indefinable change that happens when something goes off script. Johnny read the note. 3 lines of handwriting. Maybe 20 words total. His face changed. The professional mask, the one he'd worn for 20 years, through thousands of monologues, the mask that could weather any technical disaster or bombing joke, completely shattered. He looked up at the audience. Then at Ed McMahon, who was leaning forward in his chair now, concerned. Johnny started then stopped. He looked down at the note again, as if hoping the words had changed. They hadn't. He folded the note carefully. Put it in his jacket pocket. And then Johnny Carson did something he had never done in 7,000 episodes of The Tonight Show. He walked off stage. No explanation. No joke to soften it. No, we'll be right back. He simply turned and walked into the wings, past the stunned cameras, past Shirley who was crying now, past the confused production staff. Gone. Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. The control room exploded into chaos. Director Bobby Quinn was shouting into his headset. What just happened? Where's Johnny? Do we go to commercial? Someone tell me what's happening. Fred de Cordova, the show's longtime producer, stood behind Bobby with his hand over his mouth, staring at the monitors showing an empty stage. Ed McMahon still sitting at his desk, looking utterly lost. The band frozen mid-setup for the next musical cue. Roll commercial, Fred said quietly. Now. The red light went off. The studio sat in confused silence. Ed stood up, looking toward the wings where Johnny had disappeared. Doc Severinsen lowered his trumpet, exchanging worried glances with the band. 300 audience members sat in stunned silence, whispering to each other, trying to understand what they'd just witnessed. In the wings, Johnny stood with his back against the wall, the note clutched in his fist, tears streaming down his face. Shirley stood nearby, not knowing what to say, what to do. I'm sorry, she whispered. They called during the monologue. They said it was urgent. They said you'd want to know immediately. Johnny nodded, unable to speak. To understand what happened next, you need to understand who had called. And what the note said. The handwriting belonged to Shirley, but the message came from a hospital in Los Angeles. 3 lines that destroyed Johnny Carson's world in the space of a commercial break. Johnny. Christopher was in a car accident. He didn't make it. I'm so sorry. Christopher Carson was Johnny's youngest son. 29 years old. A photographer. The one Carson child who had stayed close to his father despite the divorce, despite the pressures of being Johnny Carson's kid, despite everything. They'd had lunch together 4 days ago. At Johnny's favorite restaurant in Santa Monica. Christopher had shown him photos from his latest assignment, a documentary project about working-class families in Los Angeles. Johnny remembered being proud, remembered thinking his son had found his calling. "I'll bring you the finished prints next week," Christopher had said, hugging his father goodbye in the parking lot. "You're going to love them, Dad." That was the last conversation they ever had. Christopher had been driving home from a shoot that Tuesday afternoon. A drunk driver ran a red light on Sunset Boulevard. The impact was instant. Christopher died before the ambulance arrived. The hospital had tried calling Johnny's home. His assistant. Finally, in desperation, they'd called NBC directly. The call came through to the production office at 11:47 p.m. Right in the middle of Johnny's monologue. Shirley had taken the call. Heard the news. Made the impossible decision to write that note and place it on Johnny's desk rather than wait until after the show. Because how do you let someone finish a comedy monologue when their child just died? Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The commercial break was ending. 30 seconds until they were back on air. And Johnny Carson was standing in the wings, destroyed, while 300 people waited in the studio and millions watched from home. Fred DeCordova found him there. Put a hand on his shoulder. "Johnny," Fred said gently, "we can cancel the rest of the show. We'll run a repeat. You need to go. You need to be with your family." Johnny wiped his eyes. Shook his head. "No. Johnny, nobody would blame you. Nobody expects." I said no. Johnny's voice was firm despite the tears. "Christopher." He stopped, composed himself. Christopher loved this show. He'd be furious if I canceled because of him. He'd call me a coward. "You're not a coward. You're a father who just—" "I'm finishing the show," Johnny said, and there was steel in his voice now. "But I'm doing it my way. Tell the audience. Tell them what happened. Tell them I'm coming back out, but I won't be funny tonight. I won't be entertaining. I need to say something." Fred hesitated. "This broke every rule of television. You didn't bring personal tragedy on air. You didn't make the audience uncomfortable. You certainly didn't turn a comedy show into a grief counseling session. But this was Johnny Carson. And Johnny Carson had earned the right to break every rule." "Okay," Fred said quietly. "I'll tell them." The red light came back on. But instead of Johnny's desk, the camera showed Fred DeCordova standing center stage. Something that had never happened in the show's history. "Ladies and gentlemen," Fred said, his voice unsteady. "During the commercial break, Johnny received some tragic news. His son Christopher was killed in a car accident this evening. Johnny would like to come back out and speak with you, but this will not be the show you expected tonight. If you prefer to leave, we completely understand." Not one person moved. 300 people sat in absolute silence, some crying, all waiting. Fred nodded. "Thank you." He walked off stage. A moment later, Johnny Carson walked back out. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. He looked different. The professional host persona was gone entirely. This was just a man. A father. Walking toward his desk with red eyes and slumped shoulders, carrying grief that bent him like physical weight. He sat down slowly. Ed reached over and squeezed his shoulder. Johnny nodded, acknowledging the gesture but unable to speak yet. The audience waited. Silent. Respectful. Present. Johnny pulled the note from his pocket. Unfolded it. Looked at those 3 devastating lines again. "My son died tonight," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper but the microphone catching every word. "Christopher. He was 29. A car accident. A drunk driver." He paused. Set the note on his desk carefully, as if it might disintegrate. "I thought about canceling the show. Going home. But Christopher." Johnny smiled despite the tears. "Christopher loved what I do. He never missed an episode when he was growing up. He'd call me the next day with notes. Tell me which jokes worked and which ones bombed. He was honest. Sometimes brutally honest. A few quiet laughs from the audience. Sympathetic. Gentle. The last time I saw him was 4 days ago. Johnny continued. We had lunch. He showed me photographs from his latest project. He was so talented. So passionate about his work. I was proud of him. Johnny's voice cracked. He stopped. Composed himself. The silence in the studio was total. I don't know why I'm telling you this, he said. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. I've spent 20 years making people laugh, and tonight I can't think of a single funny thing. But I needed to be here. With you. Because this show has been my life for so long, and Christopher was part of that life, and I don't know how to be anywhere else right now. Ed McMahon was crying openly. Doc Severinsen had set down his trumpet and was wiping his eyes. The audience sat transfixed, witnessing something television had never shown before, complete, unfiltered grief. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny looked directly into camera one. If you're watching at home, he said, and you have children, call them tomorrow. Tell them you love them. Don't wait. Don't assume there will be more time. Because Christopher and I were supposed to have dinner next week, and now we won't. Now we'll never have dinner again. He picked up the note one more time. Held it toward the camera briefly so viewers could see Shirley's handwriting, though not the words. This piece of paper, Johnny said, is the worst thing I've ever received in my life. 3 lines. 22 words. And they changed everything. But I'm going to keep it. Not because I want to remember this moment. But because I never want to forget what it taught me. What did it teach you? Ed asked softly, the first words he'd spoken since Johnny returned to stage. Johnny looked at him. That nothing matters more than the people we love. Not success. Not career. Not any of this. He gestured to the studio around them. Christopher used to ask me why I worked so hard. Why I did 5 shows a week for 20 years. And I'd tell him it was because I loved it. Because it mattered. He paused. But tonight, sitting in that wing, holding this note, I realized something. The show doesn't matter. The ratings don't matter. The only thing that ever really mattered was being there for the people who needed me. And I missed so much of Christopher's life because I was here instead. The audience was crying now. Not isolated sobs but collective grief. Strangers sharing a moment of profound human pain that transcended entertainment. Johnny folded the note one final time. I'm going to finish tonight's show, he said. Not because I'm strong. I'm not strong right now. But because Christopher would want me to. He'd tell me that walking off stage isn't honoring him. Finishing what I started, that's honoring him. He turned to document. Doc, can you play something? Something soft. I don't care what. Just something that feels like saying goodbye. Doc nodded, raised his trumpet, and played. A gentle melody. No words. Just music filling the silence while Johnny sat at his desk, the note in front of him, tears streaming down his face, 300 people and millions at home bearing witness. When the final note faded, Johnny stood. I won't be doing interviews tonight. I won't be funny. I'm going home to be with my family. But I needed you to know what happened. I needed to share this with you because you've been part of my life for 20 years. And in a strange way, that makes you part of Christopher's life too. The audience rose. Not applauding, that would have been wrong. Just standing. Honoring. Present. Johnny walked off stage for the second time that night. But this time, he carried something with him that he hadn't had before, the knowledge that sometimes television can be more than entertainment. Sometimes it can be communion. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The note stayed in Johnny's wallet until his death in 2005. His family found it there, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve, those 22 words still legible after 23 years. They donated it to the Smithsonian with Johnny's other Tonight Show memorabilia. It sits in a glass case now, next to his cue cards, next to his microphone. A reminder that behind every smile on television is a human being carrying unimaginable weight. Johnny never spoke about Christopher on air again. But every year on the anniversary of that March night, he would dedicate his show to everyone who's lost someone too soon. He never explained why. The audience who had been there that night understood. Years later, young comedians and talk show hosts would ask Johnny for advice. He'd tell them about timing and delivery, and how to read an audience. But his final piece of advice was always the same. Remember that you're talking to real people. With real lives. Real pain. Real loss. Don't ever forget that television is just a medium. It's the human connection that matters. That note, those 22 devastating words, taught America something profound that night. That grief doesn't make you weak. That vulnerability is courage. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show up and tell the truth. Johnny Carson didn't walk off stage that night because he was broken. He walked back on because he was human. And in that humanity, he gave television one of its most powerful moments.